Look at the world outside your window. If you draw back the heavy curtain and look past the rain, what do you see? You see the hard, unforgiving geometry of the modern age. You see monolithic structures of concrete, glass, and steel, reaching up to pierce the sky, choked with artificial, sickly glow of sodium lights. You see the labyrinth arteries of the city, pulsing not with blood, but with metallic, frantic life of commerce and industry. We live in an era of terrifying, absolute illumination. There are no shadows left for monsters to hide in. There are no uncharted oceans, no blank spaces at the edges of the map where ancient, trembling hands once inscribed the warning: Here be dragons. We have conquered the geography of our planet with a brutal, clinical efficiency. Every mountain peak has been conquered, commercialized, and photographed. Every dense, whispering jungle has been catalogued and divided. The deepest, blackest trenches of the ocean, where leviathans were once taught to sleep, have been mapped by the cold, unblinking eyes of our submersibles. The world we inhabit today is an open book, but it is a book written entirely in a sterile, uncompromising language of mathematics, efficiency, and data. It was not always this way. To understand what we have lost, we must look backward. For the vast majority of human history, the world was alive. It was breathing. It was inherently, terrifyingly magical. Imagine our ancestors standing at the edge of a primordial forest as twilight descended. To them, a shadow was not merely an absence of light caused by the rotation of Earth away from the sun. A shadow was a presence. The rustle of leaves in the canopy was not just a meteorological shift in air pressure. It was the whisper of ancient spirits, of gods taking the form of wind. A thunderstorm was a display of divine wrath or ecstasy. The turning of the seasons was a miraculous cycle of death and resurrection, a cosmic drama in which humanity played a vital, participatory role. They lived in a world saturated with meaning. Every river had a name and temperament. Every mountain was a sleeping giant. The universe was a grand, mysterious tapestry, and humanity, though small and vulnerable, was woven directly into its center. And then the machines woke up. The shift did not happen overnight. It was a slow, grinding process. The Industrial Revolution did not merely change the way we manufactured goods. It fundamentally rewired the human soul. Before the factories, human life was governed by the sun, the seasons, and the harvest. Time was cyclical. But with the invention of the mechanical chronometer, time became linear. It became something that could be sliced into hours, minutes, and seconds. Time became a commodity. It became money. The tolling of the church bell, which once called people to prayer and contemplation, was replaced by harsh, shrieking whistle of the factory, calling men and women to the assembly line. Over a century ago, the German sociologist Max Weber stood at the dawn of this new, mechanized age. He looked at the smoking chimneys bloating out the sky, the creeping sprawl of urban slums, and he observed a profound, psychological death taking place within the human species. He gave this phenomenon a name. He called it Entzauberung, the disenchantment of the world. Weber foresaw a future where humanity, armed with empirical science and insatiable hunger for progress, would systematically strip away the mystical, the sacred, and the unexplained. He warned that in our relentless pursuit to understand, control, and commodify nature, we would build ourselves an invisible prison. He called it the iron cage of rationality, a cage built of bureaucracy, unyielding logic, and the endless, exhausting demand for economic productivity. He was right. The prophecy of the iron cage has been fulfilled. We have banished the old gods from the mountaintops. We have chased the spirits from the ancient forest and turned those very forests into timber and cardboard. We have traded the comforting, mysterious warmth of myth for the blinding, fluorescent light of absolute scientific certainty. We know exactly what the stars are made of now. They are not the campfires of ancestors, nor the watchful eyes of celestial guardians. They are balls of burning gas, billions of light years away, burning in a vacuum, utterly and completely indifferent to our existence. And while this knowledge is monumental triumph of the human intellect, it has left us with a profound, aging silence in the human heart. We traded wonder for comprehension. Look at the modern adult. Look at us. We are the most technologically advanced, hyper-connected generation in the history of our species. We carry the sum total of all human knowledge in small, glowing rectangles of glass and rare earth metals in our pockets. We can communicate with anyone, anywhere, instantly, across the globe. And yet, we are profoundly, agonizingly isolated. We are drowning in information, but we are starving for wisdom. We march to the relentless, unforgiving drumbeat of the 9 to 5. We are chained to our notifications, our deadlines, our mortgages, and the quiet, gnawing anxiety that our lives are little more than a series of endless, exhausting transactions. We wake up, we produce, we consume, we sleep, and the next morning, the great uncaring machine demands that we will do it all again. We have replaced the ancient gods with new, cruel deities. The algorithm, the market, the fee. These new gods do not demand burnt offerings. They demand our attention, our time, and our outreach. We have successfully disenchanted the world. We have solved the mystery of the dark. But we have realized, perhaps too late, that the enchantment was precisely what made the heavy burden of our existence bearable. We are not meant to live in the iron cage. The human mind did not evolve to process endless streams of digital data, nor to find its ultimate spiritual purpose in a quarterly earnings report. Before we were workers, before we were consumers, before we were data points on a demographic chart, we were storytellers. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors sat around fires just like this one. They stared into the dying embers as the terrifying vast night pressed in around them. And to keep the darkness at bay, They spoke of heroes who faced impossible odds. They spoke of monsters that lurked just beyond the tree line. They built grand, sweeping mythologies to explain the terror of the storm and the miracle of the sunrise. Myth is not a luxury. It's not a childish distraction meant to be discarded the moment we receive our first paycheck. It is a fundamental psychological necessity. It is the compass by which the human soul navigates the darkest nights of our lives. So, I ask you, what happened to the society that discards its compass? What happens to adults when they are told the magic is a lie, that imagination is a waste of time, and that the only things that truly matter in this brief life are the things that can be counted, weighted, and sold? I will tell you what happens. We suffocate slowly, quietly, in the cold blue light of our screens. We lose our ability to dream of a better world because we have been convinced through sheer repetition that the broken, cynical world we have is all there is, and all there ever will be. We became prisoners of the mundane. We forget how to look up the night sky with reverence, and instead, we only look down. There is a specific kind of hunger that cannot be satisfied by anything physical. If you walk down the brightly lit aisles of any modern supermarket, you will see a temple dedicated to material abundance. We have conquered agriculture. We have engineered crops that can withstand droughts, and we can transport exotic fruits across oceans in a matter of hours. From a purely biological standpoint, the modern citizen of the industrialized world is the most well-fed creature to ever walk the surface of this planet. And yet, if you look into the eyes of the people pushing those metal carts beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, you will not see the serene containment of a species that has solved the problem of survival. You will see exhaustion. You will see a quiet, vibrating anxiety. You will see a profound, hollow emptiness. We have fed the body to the point of gluttony, but we have placed the human soul on a starvation diet. When we dismantled the mythic architecture of our ancestors, when we tore down the temples and replaced them with shopping malls and server farms, we made a fatal miscalculation. We arrogantly assumed that humanity had simply outgrown the need for stories of magic, monsters, and divine purpose. We convinced ourselves that myths are just primitive attempts to explain weather patterns or crop failures, and that since science had now explained the weather, the myths could be discarded like toys of our childhood. But myths were never just bad science. They were the operating system of the human psyche. In the early 20th century, the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung peered into the depths of the human mind and made a staggering discovery. He realized that beneath our personal memories, beneath our daily anxieties and conscious thoughts, lies a vast subterranean ocean that we all share. He called it the collective unconscious. Jung discovered that the human brain does not enter this world as a blank slate. We are born with a pre-installed map of meaning. Imprinted in our very DNA are ancient, primal blueprints that he called archetypes. The hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the great mother, the dragon. These are not just literary tropes invented by clever authors. They are psychological organs. They are as biologically real and necessary to our mental survival as our lungs are to our psychological survival. When ancient tribes told stories of a hero venturing into the dark underworld to slay a dragon, they were not just entertaining each other around the fire. They were providing a psychological roadmap. The dragon is not merely a giant reptile with wings. It is the ultimate embodiment of chaos, the paralyzing terror of the unknown, the dark, destructive impulses that lurk within our own hearts. And the hero is the part of us that must find the courage to face that chaos voluntarily, to integrate the shadow, and to bring back the gold of wisdom to the community. But what happens in a society that tells its citizens that dragons do not exist? What happens when we are taught that the only reality is the material reality, the spreadsheet, the commute, the mortgage? The archetypes do not simply vanish because we stop believing in them. They are immortal. If we do not give them a healthy, conscious outlet through grand narratives and deep fantasy, they do not quietly pack up and leave. They mutate. They go underground and they return to us as neuroses, as depression, as a pervasive sense of existential dread. Because the soul is starving for the mythic, it will devour whatever cheap, toxic substitutes the modern world offers it. Look at our contemporary culture. We have killed the old gods, but the religious impulse in the human brain remains desperately active. Because we no longer have Gandalf or Aslan or the Jedi to channel our reverence, we elevate politicians and tech billionaires to the status of infallible messiahs. We project the archetype of the savior onto flawed, corruptible men in suits. Because we no longer have the epic struggle between the forces of light and the encroaching shadow, we turn our political afflictions into holy wars. We transform our neighbors into demonic figures, projecting the archetype of the monster onto anyone who votes differently than we do. We form vicious, hyper-aggressive online tribes because we have lost the true fellowship. Because we no longer have sacred relics or magical artifacts to quest for. We stand in line for hours to buy the latest smartphone, desperately hoping that this new piece of glass and metal will finally give us an identity, a sense of belonging, a feeling of being chosen. It is a tragic comedy. We are a generation of knights and mages wandering aimlessly through the fluorescent aisles of a department store, desperately searching for the Holy Grail in the discount bins. We are trying to cure a spiritual famine with a material junk food, and it is making us sick. Have you ever felt it? The strange, unnameable restlessness that comes over you, usually late at night. You are lying in your comfortable bed in a temperature-controlled room, safe from the elements. By all historical metrics, you should be perfectly at peace. But instead, You stare at the ceiling and quiet voice whispers from the dark corners of your mind. Is this it? Is this all there is? You go to work. You pay your bills. You watch a show. You sleep. You repeat. The iron cage is comfortable, but you can feel the bars. Society will tell you that this feeling is just a midlife crisis, or a chemical imbalance, or a sign that you just need to buy a better car or go on a vacation. But the cartographer knows the truth. That restlessness is not a sickness. It is an alarm bell. It is what the great metallurgist Joseph Campbell called the call to adventure. It is the deepest, most ancient part of your psyche crying out because it knows you are meant for a grander narrative. It is the archetype of the hero, trapped inside a cubicle, screaming for the open road, for the treacherous mountain pass, for the chance to be tested against the fire. In the modern world, the call to adventure is constantly muffled. It is drowned out by the shrill ring of the alarm clock, the endless ping of emails, the numbing glow of social media feeds. We are encouraged to ignore the call, to take a pill that quiets the restlessness, to focus on our retirement plans. But when the call is ignored for too long, it turns inward. The unslayed dragons of our psyche grow massive in the darkness of our neglect. They become our anxieties, our addictions, our paralyzing fears. We became prisoners not only of the modern world, but of our own unlived lives. You are not broken because you feel empty in a world of abundance. You are starving because you have been denied the very sustenance your spirit requires. You do not need another life hack. You do not need another productivity app. You need a map. You need to remember how to navigate the landscapes of the imagination, because it is only there, in the realms of high fantasy, that we can safely confront the darkest parts of ourselves and rediscover the light. That is why you have felt drawn to these ancient stories. That is why the towering peaks of Middle-earth or the shattered plains of Roshar call to you. It's not a childish urge to run away. It is the most profound, mature instinct you possess. The instinct to survive. The instinct to reclaim your soul from the machinery of the modern age. And here, in this quiet room, away from the noise and the blinding lights, we are going to trace those maps together. Come in. Close the door behind you. Leave the noise of the streets out there in the damp and the grey. Leave the notifications, the deadlines, the frantic ticking of the clock. None of that matters in this room. You have wandered far. You are drenched by the storms of the iron cage, and you are tired. Take a seat by the fire. Let the world seep into your bones. Welcome to the cartographer's study. Look around you. It is not a large room, but it is dense with history. The walls are lined from floor to ceiling with heavy, dark oak bookshelves. They're bowing slightly under the immense weight of leather-bound tomes, crumbling bestiaries, and ancient codices. If you breathe in deeply, you can smell it. It is the distinct, comforting aroma of old paper, white ink, binding glue, and the dust. It is the scent of preserved time. The outside world This room might look like a museum of obsolete artifacts. To them, the books on those shelves hold nothing but fairy tales, fictions, escapist nonsense written by men who spent too much time dreaming. But you and I know better. Step closer to the desk. It is scarred with the marks of countless knives and stained with the spilled ink of 1,000 late nights. Look at what is spread across it. It is not a map of the world as the satellites see it. There are no borders drawn by politicians, no trade routes calculated for maximum efficiency, no sprawling concrete cities. Instead, look at the intricate, faded lines. See the jagged spines of the misty mountains cutting across the parchment like a great, sleeping serpent. Trace your finger over the dense, shadowed ink that marks the borders of the Wolfswood in the north, or the shattered storm-swept plains of the Shattered Plains in Roshar. These are the topographies of the unseen. These are the maps of the imagination. The people out there, the ones rushing past this building with their heads down, staring at their glowing screens, they believe that these maps are useless because they do not correspond to physical geography. They believe that if a place cannot be measured by GPS coordinates, it does not exist. They do not understand the fundamental truth of cartography. A map is not merely a reflection of the physical terrain. A map is a reflection of the mind that created it and the culture that required it. Ancient seafarers drew sea monsters at the edges of their charts not because they were foolish, but because they understand that the unknown is inherently dangerous, and the human mind needs a symbol for that danger in order to confront it. The maps on this desk, the maps of Middle-earth, of Westeros, of the Cosmere, are not maps of physical locations. They are maps of the human condition. When J.R.R. Tolkien drew the dark, suffocating borders of Mordor, he was not just imagining a spooky place for his characters to walk to. He was mapping the geography of absolute tyranny, the suffocating ash of the industrial war machine he witnessed in the trenches, and the creeping, paralyzing nature of despair. He drew a map of the shadow that exists in every human heart, so that we might learn how to navigate around it, or, if necessary, how to march directly into it. When George R.R. Martin sketches the towering, icy expanse of the wall in the north, he's mapping the fragile, psychological barriers we build to keep out the terrifying, indifferent forces of nature and death. When Brandon Sanderson meticulously designs the harsh, storm-battered ecology of Roshar, he's creating a topographical representation of trauma and resilience. That is what a true cartographer does. We do not just record where the mountains are. We record what the mountains mean. We study those fictional worlds with deadly seriousness because they provide us with the vocabulary to understand our own reality. The iron cage of modernity has stripped us of our spiritual language. We no longer know how to articulate our deepest fears or our highest aspirations. The modern world gives us a clinical, sterile words: depression, anxiety, burnout, geopolitical instability, market collapse. These words diagnose the mechanics of our suffering, but they offer no poetry, no meaning, and no cure. But fantasy? Fantasy gives us our language back. It tells us that the crushing weight on our chest it's not just burnout. It is the one ring growing heavier around our neck as we approach the fires of Mount Doom. It tells us that the cruelty of the corporate ladder is not just market dynamics. It is the ruthless game of thrones where honor is a liability and betrayal is currency. It tells us that our brokenness is not a permanent failure, but the very cracks through which a new, magical resilience can be forged. You have come to this sanctuary because you are seeking that language. You are looking for the words to describe the dragons you are fighting in your own life. My role here is simple. I am the archivist. I am the one who stays up late while the city sleeps, holding a candle to the ancient texts, deciphering the runes, and keeping the ink flowing. I am here to guide you through those vast, overwhelming mythologies. Over the coming weeks and months, we are going to embark on a grand expedition. We will not be rushing. We will take our time. We will sit with the texts. We will analyze the magic systems. We will dissect the philosophies of the authors. And we will extract the profound wisdom hidden beneath the surface of the dragons and the swords. We will begin with the foundation. We will study the architect himself, Professor Tolkien, and we will learn how he built a mythology of hope out of the ashes of the First World War. Then we will travel to the brutal, politically cynical landscape of J.R.R. Martin to understand why the deconstruction of our heroes is sometimes necessary to find out what they are truly made of. And finally, we will study the modern architectural genius of Brandon Sanderson, learning how the scientific method can be applied to magic and how broken people can literally bind the universe together. But before we can pack our bags for Middle-earth, before we can draw our swords in Westeros, or summon a spren on Roshar, we must address the accusation that has followed fantasy readers for nearly a century. We must confront the cynics standing outside this door in the cold rain, who point their fingers and accuse us of cowardice. We must address the charge of escapism, because until you understand the true nature of escape, you will never be able to fully embrace the journey. Rest here by the fire for a moment longer. Let the silence of the room settle over you. When you are ready, I will tell you what the professor taught us about the difference between running away and breaking free. There is a word that the modern world uses as a weapon against us. If you admit to a colleague, a family member, or a stranger that you spend your evenings reading thick volumes about imaginary continents, studying the lineages of fictional kings, or debating the mechanics of hard magic systems, eventually you will hear it. They will smile a thin, condescending smile, and they will diagnose you with a singular, damning word: escapism. They say it as if it were a pathology, a symptom of emotional immaturity. To the hyper-rational, hyper-productive adult of the 21st century, escapism is the ultimate sin. It implies that you are cowardly. It suggests that because you cannot handle the brutal economic realities of the world, the taxes, the politics, the daily grind, you have chosen to stick your head in the sand. You have retreated to a childish sandbox of elves and dragons, refusing to engage with the serious business of reality. It is a damning accusation, and it is completely, fundamentally wrong. To understand why this accusation is a fallacy, we must turn to the man who laid the very foundation stones of modern fantasy. We must turn to Professor J.R.R. Tolkien. In 1939, as the dark, very real clouds of the Second World War were gathering over Europe, Tolkien delivered a lecture at the University of St. Andrews, titled On Fairy Stories. It remains, to this day, the most profound defense of the fantasy genre ever written. In this essay, Tolkien directly confronted the charge of escapism. He did not deny that fantasy is an escape. In fact, he embraced the word, but he pointed out a crucial semantic trick that the critics were using to shame readers. Tolkien argued that the critics were deliberately confusing the escape of the deserter with the escape of the prisoner. Think about the difference. The deserter is a coward. The deserter is a soldier who abandons his post when the battle gets too difficult, betraying his comrades to save his own skin. When critics accuse us of escapism, they are accusing us of being deserters from the battlefield of real life. But what about the prisoner? Is it cowardly for a man unjustly located in a dark, suffocating cell to dream of the outside world? Is it a symptom of immaturity for a prisoner to study the architecture of his prison, looking for a way out? If a prisoner focuses his mind on the green grass, the open sky, and the memory of freedom, we do not call him a coward. We call him resilient. Tolkien argued that the modern, industrialized world, the iron cage we spoke of earlier, has become a prison for the human spirit. We are locked in a daily routine that demands our obedience and suppresses our wonder. When we read high fantasy, we are not deserting our responsibilities. We are prisoners, daring to look out the barred window of our cell. We are reminding ourselves that the prison is not the only reality. We are reminding ourselves that there is a world beyond the concrete and the spreadsheets, a world of beauty, danger, and profound meaning. Why should a man be scorned? Tolkien asked. If finding himself in a prison, he tries to get out and go home. Or if when he cannot do so, he thinks and talks about other topics than jailers and prison walls. The critics of fantasy demand that we spend all our time discussing the jailers and the prison walls. They call this being realistic. They demand that we consume endless streams of grim news, political outrage, and cynical literature, because that is what they consider serious. But Tolkien, a man who had survived the unimaginable, literal hell of the trenches at the Somme, knew that obsessing over the mud and the blood does not make you noble. It just makes you muddy and bloody. He understood that fantasy does not ask us to ignore the darkness of reality. On the contrary, it provides us with the tools to confront it without being destroyed by it. When you read a story about small, seemingly insignificant hobbit who must carry a terrible burden into the heart of enemy territory, you are not ignoring the struggles of your own life. You are sublimating them. You are translating the chaotic, paralyzing anxieties of your daily existence, the mortgage you can barely pay, the sickness of a loved one, the overwhelming dread of shifting geopolitical landscape, into a narrative structure that your brain can actually process. You project your own formless anxieties onto the Dark Lord, and by watching Frodo takes one more step up the slopes of Mount Doom, despite his exhaustion, you are training your own psychological muscles. You are practicing resilience in the safety of a simulated environment. You are not running away from the battle. You are retreating to the armory to sharpen your sword. This is the profound, therapeutic power of deep lore. When we analyze the rigid scientific rules of Brandon Sanderson's magic systems, we are not just engaging in a nerdy, intellectual exercise. We are reassuring a chaotic, unpredictable part of our brain that the universe can have rules, that actions can have logical consequences, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, human ingenuity and understanding can prevail. When we study the tangled, bloody lineages of House Targaryen or Stark, we are safely exploring the darkest, most treacherous aspects of human nature: greed, lust, betrayal, from a safe distance, allowing us to better recognize those traits in the real world and in ourselves. Fantasy is not a blindfold, it is a lens. It is a lens that filters out the blinding, chaotic noise of the modern world, allowing us to focus on the eternal, archetypal path that lies beneath. So, the next time someone accuses you of escapism, do not lower your head. Do not feel the need to apologize for the worn paperback in your hands or the hours you spent listening to lore in the dark. Look them in the eye. Acknowledge that you are indeed escaping. And then, quietly, ask them why they are so fiercely defending the walls of the prison. If escape is the first defense of the fantasy genre, then what lies beyond the prison walls? If we manage to break free from the iron cage of modernity, if only for a few hours in the pages of a book, what exactly are we looking for? Tolkien had an answer for this as well. He called it recovery. To understand recovery, you must first understand a psychological condition that afflicts almost every adult in the industrialized world. We do not have a clinical name for it, but we all know the symptoms. It is the creeping, silent disease of familiarity. When you are a child, everything is a miracle. A simple stone found in the riverbed is an ancient artifact. A thunderstorm is a terrifying, magnificent performance by the sky. A horse is a beast of staggering power and grace. The world is sharp, vibrant, and overflowing with magic. But as we age, the iron cage demands efficiency. Our brains, in order to process the overwhelming amount of data required to survive in a modern society, begin to categorize and filter the world. We stop looking at the tree. We only see the category tree. We stop feeling the rain. We only perceive weather that will delay my commute. We strip the world of its wonder in order to navigate it faster. We become blind to the miracles that surround us, simply because we have seen them 1,000 times before. We suffer from a terrible spiritual apathy. We look at the world, but we no longer truly see it. This is where the magic of the Cartographer's map comes into play. Tolkien argued that the primary function of fairy stories, of high fantasy, is not to create a completely alien world that has nothing to do with ours. Its function is to take the things of our world, the mundane things we have stopped noticing, and bath them in a new, unearthly light. It is to scrap the grime of familiarity of the lens of our perception. Think of how fantasy accomplishes this. In our world, iron is just a cheap industrial metal. It is a rebar. It is a scaffolding. We don't even look at it. But when you read about a dwarven smith in the depths of a mountain, striking a glowing anvil, singing an ancient song to fold the metal, forging a blade that will glow blue in the presence of evil, suddenly, iron is not just a commodity anymore. It is an elemental force. It is the earth's bones, shaped by fire and wind. In our world, a forest is just a collection of timber, a space waiting to be developed. But when you walk through Lothlorien or the ancient whispering woods of the children of the forest in Westeros, the trees become sentinels. They became ancient breathing entities that remembered the dawn of the world. By placing familiar things, bread, wine, fire, stone, trees, horses, into a mythical setting, fantasy performs an act of psychological alchemy. It makes the ordinary extraordinary again. When you close a good fantasy novel and look out your window, the world has subtly changed. The apathy has cracked. You look at a crow sitting on a power line, and for a split second, it is not just a nuisance. It is a scout for the Dark Lord, or a messenger from a forgotten god. You look at sprawling, ugly factory, and you see the dark, industrial gears of Isengard. You look at the stars, and you remember that they are the very things the elves first saw when they awoke in the darkness. This is recovery. It is the regaining of a clear view. Fantasy does not blind us to reality. It washes our eyes so that we can see reality as it truly is. Raw, terrifying, beautiful, and profoundly strange. It gives us back the child's vision, but arms it with the adult's understanding of sorrow and consequences. And this brings us to the core of why adults specifically need this genre more than children do. Children already have recovery. Their world is already enchanted. It is the adult, worn down by decades of routine, cynically navigating a world driven by economics and politics, who desperately needs their vision cleansed. We need to be reminded that courage still matters, even when the corporate structure tells us that compliance is safer. We need to be reminded that loyalty is a virtue, even when the market rewards betrayal and self-interest. We need to see these virtues play out on an epic scale, painted in the bold colors of magic and myth, so that we can recognize their quiet, faded equivalents in our own everyday lives. When a man reads about a king returning to his rightful throne to heal a broken land, a dormant noble part of his own psyche awakens. He remembers that he too has a responsibility to bring order to his own small kingdom, his family, his work, his community. When a woman reads of a shield maiden standing alone against a terrifying darkness, an ancient resilience within her is stoked into a flame. She remembers that she does not have to yield the creeping despair of the modern world. The maps on this desk are not a distraction from your life. They are a blueprint for how to live it with dignity. We go to the fantasy worlds to learn the virtues that the modern world has forgotten how to teach. And then we bring those virtues back with us. We return from the escape. But I must warn you, the journey we are about to undertake is not always going to be comfortable. The virtues we seek are not always found in shining castles or sung by elven choirs. Sometimes, to truly understand the value of a light, you must plunge into an absolute, suffocating darkness. Tolkien showed us the foundation of hope, but the modern era of fantasy has required a different kind of a map. A map drawn not in ink, but in blood. In our next session by the fire, we must leave the relatively clear moral borders of Middle-earth. We must travel to a place where the lines between the hero and the monster are terrifyingly blurred. We must look into the grimdark mirror. We must talk about the brutal architecture of J.R.R. Martin. If you roll up the map of Middle-earth and push it to the side of the desk, you will find beneath it a very different kind of a parchment. The edges of this map are not illuminated with gold leaf. They are stained with wine and dirt and dried blood. The lines are harsh. The borders are drawn not by divine mandate, the edge of the sword and the ruthless mathematics of power. We have spoken of Tolkien and how his high idealism offers us a beacon of hope. But if we are to be truly honest cartographers, we must admit a difficult truth about the modern adult mind. We are cynics. We have been raised in an era of 24-hour news cycles. We have watched political empires crumble, corporate giants lie without consequence, and leaders we were told to trust expose themselves as corrupt, selfish, and deeply flawed. The iron cage of modernity has not just made us tired, it has made us deeply, profoundly suspicious of pure goodness. When a modern, exhausted adult reads a story about a hero of unblemished virtue who defeats the Dark Lord because his heart is pure, a quiet voice in the back of their mind often whispers, "That is not how the world works." We have seen too much real politics. We know that in the bedroom of the halls of power, the good guy does not always win. Often, the good guy is outmaneuvered, outspent, and destroyed by those willing to play a darker game. If fantasy is only ever a mirror reflecting our highest, purest ideals, it risks losing the trust of the cynical mind. It risks feeling naive. And that is why, in the final years of the 20th century, a new architect stepped forward to draw a different kind of a map. J.R.R. Martin looked at the towering, pristine castles of high fantasy and decided to inspect the dungeons. He decided to examine the plumbing, the ledgers, and the torch chambers. He gave us the grimdark mirror. When people who do not understand fantasy look at A Song of Ice and Fire, they see only the brutality. They see the betrayal, the red wedding, the moral decay, the violence, and the Machiavellian political theater. They ask, if the real world is already so dark and depressing, why would you want to escape into a world that is just as cruel, if not worse? But they're missing the profound psychological function of the dark mirror. We do not read grimdark fantasy because we are sadists. We read it because it validates our understanding of human corruption, and in doing so, it earns our trust. Martin does not insult our intelligence by pretending that evil is an ugly monster living in a faraway volcano. He places evil exactly where we know it resides in the real world, in the hearts of smiling politicians, in the blind ambitions of the wealthy, and in the desperate choices of ordinary people pushed to their absolute limits. Consider the tragedy of Ned Stark. In any other fantasy story, Ned Stark is the archetypal hero. He is honorable, he is just, he is a loving father, and he tells the truth. In a Tolkien narrative, the universe itself would bend to protect a man of such virtue. But Martin places this Tolkienesque hero into a world governed by the ruthless laws of power. And what happens? His honor becomes a noose. His mercy becomes a vulnerability. His refusal to play the political game does not save his soul. It gets him executed, and it plunges his entire family into a devastating war. This is a shocking, visceral trauma for the reader. It feels wrong, but beneath the shock, there is a dark, resonant truth that the modern mind recognizes. Virtue is not a shield against consequence. Being a good person does not guarantee that you will win. In fact, being a good person in a corrupt system puts a target on your back. Why is this important for our psychological survival? Why do we need a cartographer to map this abyss? Because if we only ever read about heroes who win easily, we begin to believe that morality is supposed to be easy. We begin to believe that if we do the right thing, the universe owes us a reward. And when the real world inevitably punishes us for our honesty, when we are passed over for a promotion because we refused to lie, or when we are isolated because we stood up for what is right, we feel betrayed. We become bitter. We abandon our morality because it did not protect us. Martin strips away the illusion of the reward. He forces us to ask the most difficult philosophical question of all. Is honor worth it if it costs you everything? By dragging us through the mud and the blood of Westeros, by showing us that oaths are broken and the innocent suffer, Martin creates a canvas of absolute darkness. He employs the artistic technique of chiaroscuro, the dramatic contrast between light and dark. You see, a candle burning in the middle of a sunlit meadow is invisible. It means nothing. But a single, flickering candle burning in the deepest pitch black cavern, that is a miracle. That is a beacon. In a world as brutal and cynical as Westeros, where power is the only currency and betrayal is the norm, an act of genuine kindness is no longer a cheap fantasy trope. It becomes a monumental act of rebellion. When Brienne of Tarth refuses to break an oath in a world where everyone else breaks them daily. When Jon Snow tries to unite warring factions despite knowing it will likely get him killed. These are not naive fairy tales. They are hard-won, bleeding victories. Because we have seen the horrors of this world, we know exactly what these characters are risking. We know the price of their morality, and therefore their heroism shines 1,000 times brighter. This is the psychological utility of the grimdark mirror. It teaches us how to integrate our own shadow. Carl Jung warned that a person who believes they are entirely good, who refuses to acknowledge their own capacity for malice, is a dangerous person. They are naive, and they will be easily broken by the real world. To be truly moral, you must first understand the monster within you. You must know that you have the capacity to be a Lannister, to be a Bolton, to be a tyrant in your own small kingdom. Martin's morally grey characters, the Sandor Clegane, the Jaime Lannister, they hold up a mirror to our own deeply flawed natures. They show us that nobody is purely good, and very few are purely evil. We are all broken vessels, capable of horrific selfishness and breathtaking sacrifice, often on the very same day. The modern adult needs his darkness. We need to see the grime, the political failure, and the moral ambiguity so that when we finally witness a character choose to do the right thing despite the overwhelming darkness, we can believe it. We can say, yes, the world is a meat grinder. The iron cage is real. The system is rigged. But I can still choose to hold the line. Tolkien gave us the ideal to strive for. Martin gives us the armor required to survive the journey. Tolkien tells us why we must fight. Martin tells us how much it is going to hurt. But there is a third architect. If Tolkien is the thesis and Martin is the brutal antithesis, then we must look into the modern era for the synthesis. We must look to a cartographer who understands the trauma and the darkness of the modern world, but refuses to let us wallow in it. A man who looks at broken people not as tragedies, but as the only people capable of holding the universe together. Draw your cloaks tight. The storm outside is passing, but the true work of the soul is just beginning. We must turn our eyes to the stormlight. We must map the architecture of the broken hero. We have walked through the golden woods of ideal myth. We have waded through the bloody, cynical mud of the grimdark reality. Now, we must look to the present. We must look at how the maps of fantasy are being drawn right now, in the 21st century, for a generation whose minds have been uniquely shaped and uniquely fractured by the modern world. Look at the third map on this desk. It does not look like the others. It is not drawn by the archaic, poetic flourishes of the professor, nor is it stained with the gritty realism of Westeros. This map looks almost like a blueprint. It is precise. It is systematic. It traces not just rivers and mountains, but the very laws of physics that govern the world. Welcome to Cosmere. Welcome to the architecture of Brandon Sanderson. If Tolkien gave us the mythology and Martin gave us the politics, then Sanderson gives us the science. He is the engineer of modern fantasy. And to the modern mind, a mind trained by the iron cage to look for logic, rules, and empirical data, Sanderson's approach is a revelation. In the past, magic in fantasy was exactly that, magical. It was a soft, mystical force. Gandalf did not have a mana bar. He did not explain the kinetic energy required to create a flash of light. The magic was a manifestation of divine will, untethered by mathematics. But the modern mind stepped in the language of technology and systems, often craves structure. We live in a world governed by code, algorithms, and the laws of thermodynamics. Sanderson look at fantasy and ask a radical question. What if magic was not a break from the laws of physics, but simply a branch of physics we do not yet understand? He gave us what we now call hard magic. Magic with rules, costs, and rigid limitations. Magic that must be studied, tested, and mastered like a science. To the critics, this might sound like we are bringing the Iron Cage into our fantasy. They might argue that quantifying magic ruins the mystery. But they are missing the profound psychological genius of this architecture. Sanderson understood a fundamental truth about storytelling, a rule he formalized himself. An author's abilities to solve conflicts with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. If a hero can simply wave a wand and solve any problem with no explanation, the tension evaporates. It feels cheap. But if the hero's magic have a strict limitations, if they can only push or pull metals, or if they require stormlight that quickly runs out, then the magic cannot solve the problem for them. The hero is forced to rely on their intellect, their resourcefulness, and their humanity. By creating rigid scientific limitation on his magic, Sanderson ensures that the true focus of his story is never the spectacle of the spell. This is the struggle of the human soul trying to wield it. But there is a deeper layer to Sanderson's architecture, a layer that speaks directly to the silent epidemic of the modern age. When you strip away the massive swords, the shard blade, and the alien ecologies of his world, you are left with something starkly, painfully recognizable. You are left with a clinical study of mental illness and trauma. Look at the protagonists of the Stormlight Archive. Kaladin is not a traditional square-jawed hero. He is a man paralyzed by severe clinical depression and survival guilt, constantly fighting the urge to simply give up. Shallan is a young woman suffering from dissociative identity disorder, fracturing her own mind into different personas to survive the horrific abuse of her past. Dalinar is a recovering addict, haunted by the atrocities he committed in his youth, struggling with the crushing weight of PTSD. These are not quirks. These are not minor flaws added for flavor. These mental illnesses are the very core of who those characters are. In the real world, the Iron Cage tells us that trauma makes us defective. Society demands that we hide our depression, medicate our anxieties, and present a smooth, unbroken facade of productivity. We are made to feel that our mental scars are liabilities. But in the Cosmere, Sanderson flips his paradigm completely upside down. In his universe, you cannot access the highest forms of magic if your soul is whole. The magic, the investiture, requires a crack and a spirit to enter. It is only the broken people, the traumatized people, the people who have been shattered by life, who can form a bond with the mystical forces of the world. Your trauma is not a disqualification from heroism, it is the literal prerequisite for it. Do you understand the psychological power of that message for a modern adult? When a reader who struggles every morning just to get out of bed because of the heavy, suffocating blanket of depression reads Kaladin's internal monologue, they feel truly, deeply seen. They see their own invisible battle externalized and validated on an epic scale. And more importantly, Sanderson does not offer a magical cure for their trauma. Kaladin does not swear an oath and suddenly stop being depressed. The magic does not rewire his brain chemistry. He still has days where the darkness wins. He still falls to his knees in the mud. But what the magic does do is force him to take the next step. The most powerful words in the entire Stormlight archive are not an ancient spell of destruction. They are profoundly simple, psychological woe. I will take responsibility for what I have done. If I must fall, I will rise each time a better man. Sanderson uses the architecture of fantasy to map the process of cognitive behavioral therapy. He uses epic world building to teach us how to integrate our shadows, how to accept our brokennesses, and how to forge our pain into purpose. He shows us that a hero is not someone who never breaks. A hero is someone who sweeps up their own shattered pieces, looks at the sharp edges, and decides to build a mosaic out of them. A mosaic that is stronger and more beautiful, precisely because has been broken. Tolkien gave us hope that there is light at the end of the dark forest. Martin reminds us that there are wolves in the forest, and they have teeth. But Sanderson teaches us how to forge a spear out of our own shattered bones, so we can walk through that forest with our heads held high. These are the three pillars of our sanctuary: the ideal, the reality, the reconstruction. These are the maps we will study. But before I close the books for tonight, before I extinguish the candle and leave you to your thoughts, there is one final piece of business. A cartographer does not merely draw the lines. He must make a wall to those who follow his charts. The hour grows late. The candles on the desks have burned low, pulling wax upon the oak. We have covered a great deal of ground tonight. We have looked out the window at the iron cage of modern world, at the relentless ticking machinery that tries to convince us that magic is dead. We have diagnosed the quiet starvation of the adult soul, wandering through a disenchanted world, desperate for the nourishment of myth. We have listened to the professor, defending our right to escape the prison of the mundane, and we have learned how to use those stories to recover our sight, to see the profound beauty hidden in the ordinary. We have looked into the grimdark mirror of Westeros to forge our armor, and we have studied the architecture of the Cosmere to learn how to heal our broken bones. But a map, no matter how beautiful drawn, no matter how perfectly scaled, is ultimately just a piece of parchment. It is a promise. It is an invitation. A map is entirely useless unless someone is willing to step out their door and walk the path. And so we arrive at the threshold. If you step back out into the digital world right now, you will be met with a deafening roar. The internet of today is chaotic, sprawling bazaar. It is ruled by merchants of outrage, by the frantic,
flickering screens that demand your attention in 10 seconds increments. It is a place of loud voices, fast cuts, shallow hot takes, and the endless, exhausting cycle of algorithmic noise. I have no interest in shouting over that noise. I have no interest in rushing. Here, in the Cartographer's study, time moves differently. We do not consume stories. We sit with them. We let them breathe. We treat the lore not as disposable entertainment, but as sacred text containing the psychological blueprints of our survival. And so, as the architect of this sanctuary, I make a vow to you. If you choose to return to this room, if you choose to pull up a chair by this fire and embark on this journey with me, I promise you this. I will never insult your intelligence. I will never trade the depth of the lore for a cheap, fleeting trend. I will honor the quiet, exhausted adult within you who simply wants a place to rest, to think, and to remember what it feels like to wander. I vow to keep the fire burning. I vow to keep the ambient noise of the outside world at bay. When you press play on these records, whether you are driving through the dark arteries of the city, sitting at your desk avoiding the gaze of the iron cage, or lying in bed trying to quiet a restless mind, you will find consistency here. You will find a steady voice, a warm hearth, and a deep respect for the mythologies that keep us tethered to our humanity. This is the beginning of our grand expedition. We are officially opening the ledger on Volume 1, Architects of the Myth. Over the next 3 months, we will dissect the bedrock of modern fantasy. In Chapter 1, we will spend 4 long quiet nights with J.R.R. Tolkien. We will travel from the trenches of the Great War to the slopes of Mount Doom, analyzing the languages, the soft magic of the unseen, and the profound Christian Stoic philosophy of hope that dictates why Frodo had to fail, so that mercy could triumph. In Chapter 2, we will leave the Shire behind and ride north into the biting winds of George R.R. Martin's Westeros. We will study the Machiavellian mechanics of feudal power, the tragic deconstruction of the classic hero, and the terrible, bleeding costs of blood magic. We will learn how to navigate a world where honor is a liability. And in Chapter 3, we will step into the cosmic scale of Brandon Sanderson. We will study the strict laws of hearth magic, the theology of shards and intent. We will closely examine the shattered minds of Knights Radiant, learning how trauma is transformed into literal power. 13 weeks. 13 deep dives into the abyss of imagination. But a cartographer cannot chart the unknown alone. I need travelers. I need those who are willing to listen in the dark. If you have found some comfort by this fire tonight, if you feel that the iron cage has loosened its grips on you, even just a friction, then I ask you to leave your mark in the ledger. Subscribe to this archive. Turn on the notification so that when the next map is unrolled, you will know the door. You will know that the door to the study is open. If you know another wandering soul, a friend, a colleague, a fellow prisoner of the modern age who looks exhausted, who misses the magic of the world, share this parchment with them. Invite them to the heart. There is always an empty chair waiting in the cartographer's room. The rain has stopped. The night is quiet. Your real world awaits you out there. The alarm clock will ring tomorrow morning. The spreadsheets will demand your attention. The iron cage will attempt to lock its doors once again. But you are no longer unarmed. You are carrying the map in your mind. You know now that the dragons are real, and more importantly, you know that they can be beaten. Hold fast to the myth. Keep the darkness at bay. I am the Cartographer. The map is drawn. The road awaits. I will see you next week, travelers. We are going to Middle Earth.